Gallery. We're going to start our tour and talk for this afternoon. I'm Michael Kobaz, and
I'm Tina
so
Larja.
we are the gallery, and we are having the reception for our current collective exhibition, which features the work of Laurence Bach, Kitty Caparella, Anne Marble, Lee Muslin, and Jeanne O'Shell. So we're excited for uh, for the shows. It's a great collection, and we hope you enjoy it. So first, we are going to do a walkthrough for the exhibition. We're going to visit each artist's gallery, and they will speak about their work. And then that should take about 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to open the breakout rooms. So each artist has their own room, and you'll be shooted into the room that you signed up for. If you didn't sign up for anybody, we'll put you in a room once we get there. So and then then you can ask the artist questions and visit. We're going to hold any questions until we get to the breakout rooms. So you please want to stay muted during the walkthrough. And then artists, when we get to your room, you'll want to unmute yourself. And we are recording this, so we're going to post it on our website after the fact, so you can watch it again if you like. And the gallery is open. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 6. So you're welcome to come and visit. You don't need an appointment, but you can make one if you like. We keep the occupancy to 10 people maximum, and everyone has to wear a mask when they come in. And you can also see all the work on our website. So each artist has a page, and you can see and even make purchase on the website. We ship, and you can pick up as well. So I will put the link to the website in the chat at some point. So I'm going to, so we'll get started with the tour. I'm going to spotlight Tina's video to start the walkthrough. And the first gallery that we're going to visit is Laurence Bach. So Larry, how are you?
Yes. Thank you. And thank you, Mike and Tina, for hosting this. We appreciate it, all of us. I'll tell you a little bit about the new series. Anybody who's followed my work up till now knows that there's a consistency usually to the size and the format. So living through COVID for the past year, I went from very light, jovial, floral images to a very dark background. The rocks, the black background, and then some of the decaying flowers led me to this series. I call it Midnight because these things I think are done and want to be perceived as being at night. And when things are hard to see, but then somehow come into light through the moon. I like the idea of that center frame. I've done that before, 40 years ago for the Paros Dream Book. I feel like there's a mat that has imagery on it, as well as an image inside. And so the outside image spills into the beveled mat and the inside image spills out onto the mat. So there's a in and out game being played. I'm a collector. I pick up trash off the streets, lots of twigs and objects that I want to photograph at some point. The rocks I shot at Provincetown in Massachusetts, not knowing quite what I was going to do with them, but there they are. This was a couple years ago. And my medium is Photoshop. I've taught that for 43 years at the University of the Arts. And I've worked with Photoshop and the images that I've collected. And I have an unbelievable amount of freedom, almost an overwhelming amount of freedom of how I can twist and turn and change colors, exaggerate those golds and ochres. There's endless amounts of possibilities that come out of the Photoshop application. But in the end, it's a story. It's about the push and pull of those rocks against that beautiful piece of fabric. There's always going to be some contrast between the elements. And sure, there's design and there is photography, but I don't think of myself often as a photographer. I feel like I'm an artist who works with photographic images. So there are collages and drawings that lead up to these final pieces, and they change inevitably. If you looked at my laptop, you'd find number 14, A, B, C, D, E. There's dozens of them that follow each image. This series is printed on canvas and stretchers, and they measure 30 by 30 inches. I've experimented with all kinds of watercolor papers and shiny and satin, and this time I wanted them on canvas. The black, when you see the originals, is just velvety and beautiful on a canvas surface. And you can see a little bit of an edge there to see that they're about 1.5 inches deep on the stretched canvas. So that's just a technical aspect of how they're made. But if you look deeply, there's a play between the objects and the celebration of the light. It's, for me and my students, I've always talked about the light and how the light animates the objects and makes them surreal. And so whether it's this close-up of a leaf and its skeleton playing against some dried roses, against the rocks, those are the things that make me happy. I like collecting those objects and I like being able to manipulate them. And there are more in this series, but Mike and Tina chose these. There's a good one. Go back to that one. That's a beauty. Going on that. The frame, the objects, the fabric that's floating through it, a beautiful piece of black satin interrupts all the dried flowers, and something about that juxtaposition and contrast really thrills me. So that's what I'm drawn to. Mike, do you have any questions for me? Anything that I could help answer?
With so many options, where do you like stop and, I mean, make a decision? It must, I mean, there's such an infinite range.
It is. And I make little ones, I pin them up on the wall, I live with them, I scribble on them and then change it. But you can see even just the way those green leaves, should that fabric be out of the frame? Should that fabric be behind the frame? And Photoshop gives you all these wonderful layered options that somehow you know when it's time to stop.
Larry, how did you experience the transition from photo to digital?
Well, teaching at the University of the Arts, we didn't have a choice. The people who bucked against going digital didn't have their jobs for very long. And as a designer, I was already in the digital world. As a graphic designer, I used Photoshop, and I used InDesign, I used Illustrator. So it was kind of a natural transition for me to go into Photoshop and leave the darkroom. If you know my other work, I spent hours doing multiple images in the darkroom, layer after layer, masking and reshooting. And it was a wonderful process in those days because we didn't have any other choices. I never made a single image since 1972, I don't think. I've always worked with multiple images, never satisfied with a single image. And having gone to graduate school in Switzerland, where I was allowed to experiment with photography and layer images, that gave me the license to just keep doing it as a teacher and as an artist.
Thank you, Larry. It's beautiful work.
Thank you. If you can, people, hope you could see the originals because it's quite different than the small digital aspect of it. But thanks.
Nothing beats seeing the work in person, if you can.
For all of us.
So now we're heading to Lee Muslin's gallery. Lee,
Yes. Hi. First, I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank Tina and Mike for the great installation job they do as usual. They always put together everything very beautifully. And also this great idea of doing this virtual tour and reception. It really has worked out perfectly, I think. So my work generally is created by intuition, and I create work that's about expression and movement. I usually start with mark making with various materials, graphite, charcoal, woody pencils, water soluble pens, all different things. I like to make gestural and lyrical marks. Then I decide on a color palette and mix a lot of variations of the color, including a lot of chromatic neutrals to balance out, to really let the brighter colors sing. And I also like to build a lot of layers and scratch through the layers so that you can see what's underneath and really, dive into the picture and really get lost and absorbed into the surface. I rely a lot on serendipity, sort of just go with the flow, see what's happening, and let the painting tell me where it's going. And then I develop, whatever appears. And this free-flowing improvisation captures my unconscious and brings forth an emotional response. So there's a lot of emotion in these paintings. I love doing a lot of drips, as you could see, and splatters, sort of gets all that emotional energy going. And I use graffito, which is a fancy way of saying scratching through the paint so you can see what's underneath. And a lot of times I'll use that one in particular, has a gesso that I use and built up circles and mark making with the gesso. So it's actually a raised surface. And I also listen to music while I paint. So my strokes will change with the music. There can be soothing and mellow with classical music, or more exuberant with jive or swing. I'm a swing dancer, so that's a lot of that goes in there. This painting in particular was created with a process called automatic painting, and that's like from the artist, the abstract expressionist of the 50s. You really, usually I paint, without thinking, and I go with the flow, but with this one, it was really every single mark. I made a mark, stepped back, looked, and intuitively made another mark. And the whole painting was pretty much created with that back and forth process. I did in the end, finally, go back and refine some areas again, thinking of composition and, did this need another color here, or is it another shape needed there? But that was really, really an automatic painting. So it was really pretty much all from the gut, and, taken from the artists who work like that, like Pollock and de Kooning and Rothko. And a couple of my favorite abstract expressionists were Helen Frankenthaler and Joan Mitchell. I really, really love their work. I just saw Joan Mitchell's work I guess 2 years ago, and it's amazing in person. These 12 by 12 paintings I started creating last March during when we were in lockdown for the pandemic. As I was working from my home studio, I wasn't able to go to my beautiful large studio in Spring City. So I used these 12 by 12 panels, which were a manageable size in my small home studio. And because I wasn't able to go dancing at that time, as I said, I'm a swing dancer, and everything was shut down, obviously, I poured all my dancing energy into these 12 by 12 paintings. So most of them are either titled after swing tunes or other tunes. There's a lot of movement in them. And that's how these are all created. It's not only swing. I've done other dancing over the years too, but in particular. Swing is my favorite at this point anyway. And this particular one's called Swing City. So I kind of continued that once I was able to get back into the studio and work on larger work. I was sort of continuing that theme in my work.
So Lee, are you working on multiples at the same time?
Yes, I always work on more than one at the same time. At least two, but sometimes more. The 12 by 12s, I was working on 4 at a time. A large one like this, 36 by 36, I will maybe work on 2 at a time. And again, you can see the sgraffito in there and all the mark making. Yeah, I usually decide on a color palette in the beginning, and I might vary from that, but usually I stick with it. But again, I like to create a lot of neutrals too, because if you have everything all bright, then everything is fighting against one another. If you have neutrals to balance off the brighter colors, then you could really, really appreciate the brighter colors.
And are you setting up like, do you have like multiple paint pots like ready to go so you can like work continuously and you don't have to stop and mix colors and such?
Yeah, I do usually mix up my palette in the beginning, but I have a palette that I actually make that keeps, because I work in acrylic, which dries very fast. So I have a palette that I make with the wet toweling underneath, and then a piece of tracing paper or parchment paper, and I put the paint on top of that. And that actually keeps the paint wet for quite a while. So I will mix up a lot of paint, but as I'm going, I will continue to mix. Again, I mix the same colors together so there's a harmony within the piece. So every color usually has a little bit of the other colors in it to create that harmony. And I'll usually, if I'm working on 4 pieces, usually those 4 pieces will have the same color palette.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Thanks so much.
So now we're heading into Anne Marble's gallery. Anne. Oh, Anne, you're muted.
Yep, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Michael and Tina, and for all the work that you've done. Everything looks better than I could have hoped for. There's something really great about having a show where the pieces are all dressed up and looking their best. And even better, and forgive some of my fantastical thinking, but they start talking to each other. I mean, as a group, and which makes sense. They all came from my working on them. With 2 exceptions, all of this work was done during the pandemic. And as a matter of fact, all of the work, the processes were new to me. And I was a printmaker, and I still am, and a painter. But now I have, thanks to the time that the pandemic has given artists, been able to expand what I'm doing and also be less self-critical. You can see the materials I use are very basic, like these twigs and pieces of cloth. That's knitted wire dipped in pulp on this one. And Tina, you can just keep panning around and I'll just keep talking about whatever you land on. So I actually found the pandemic, I almost hate to say this, exciting time for me, because I had the gift of time, like a lot of artists, and could really take away a lot of the judgment. The problem with doing work is you keep asking yourself, is it good? Is it good? Is it good? And this, now I can just say, I'm doing this. I'm gonna let the piece tell me what to do. So often I start with very little of an idea, and I just start working with materials that I have. This one is one of the pieces that was done before the pandemic. This is one of the colorful ones. The other ones are made more of muted tones, not consciously, but I think that that just was a result of being closed down and being in the environment that we are. I mean, the color got drained out of things. I have a fascination with birds, so I call this piece Feathers. There's, I think, 450 little pieces of paper that are in here. And what I like about this piece and some of the others is it really speaks to the whole is greater than the sum of its part. These are all these tiny little pieces that get together and unite to make one big piece. I had no idea what it was going to look like after I'd done all that cutting. And actually they're hung by magnets, so that they lift off the background. These are two other pieces. I was happily involved with getting to understand fiber, and one of my fiber group people is here. Thank you. And I found that it was very grounding to work with these materials. I needed to touch things, and I needed to manipulate them with my hands. And I think that also was something that was needed because of the pandemic. We needed to get grounded somehow, and this was my way of doing it. Let me list a few of the not techniques, but kinds of materials that I used. There's flax roving, there's string, there's bamboo, there's twigs, there's paper, there's wire, there's, I think in the one back there, there were chestnut hulls and seeds, and the list kind of keeps going. I kind of collect whatever I see around me. This is a very large piece. And I call this Flutter and Fly. And if you look closely at it, there's the suggestion of, and actually images of birds in many of them. And again, I cut these all out. I cut them out manually, not with a die cutter. So they're shaped a little differently. And then let's see, I think there's over 300 pieces on this. Again, uniting to make something bigger than the pieces. As you can see, they kind of lift off the background, and that's done by putting them on steel with magnets. With that exception, the steel and the magnets, almost all of the material is natural. So here we go back into a pandemic piece. One theme that kind of evolved for me was the idea of, and I didn't see this until afterwards, the idea of barriers. And the pandemic put up a lot of barriers for all of us, things that we couldn't do, we couldn't see, we couldn't be with our friends, or we couldn't be with our family. Sometimes these barriers are actually some barriers that can be touched, but more often they're barriers that are created for us or by us. This is a knitted wire piece, also dipped in paper pulp several times, and it started to rust because I used a kind of wire that rusts when it comes in contact with water. this is another piece that is knitted wire, but around a monotype that I made, and it was sitting around, and I didn't know quite what to do with that piece. And then it started screaming at me, saying, "Please use me. I want to be in that piece." And so there it is. I don't remember what I call this. Seeing Many Moons. And it's constructed with bamboo also, the frame. Let's see, the one on the bottom is also a barrier type image. Again, I didn't know I was doing a series on barriers until Michael put the show up. And then I looked at it and I said, there are things that are coming out here that I had no idea were happening. And this particular piece is made out of flax roving, just flax roving and glue. And it's called Soft Barrier. Let's see, let's see, oh, here we go. I call this one Ghost Fence. Let's see, it's not quite focused, Tina. There we go. Which is knitted wire. I was getting kind of fancy with yarn overs, wire overs to make the big holes. And then again, dipped in paper pulp and then manipulated once it was dry to make the form. And then this one is called Seeing Moons. More knitted wire as kind of the frame around a monotype that I'd done a couple years ago. And they just needed to be married. So here is the result. And it's interesting how you find things that want to go together. You pick them up after years and say, I know what I want to do with this. Okay, here, this is the final bit. All these pieces that you just saw were done without intention. I just would start with some kind of materials and manipulate them and work them, and they would tell me what to do. It sounds a little insane, but it's true. I would kind of let that be my process. What is it that the material wants to do? So I had to make myself kind of the tool of the material. This piece and the one next to it, as I said, were made from an intention to express my sorrow about immigration, which has been going on for a long time. The immigration at the border, as you know, is a travesty, and it's involving thousands of people, many of them children. I just felt that there was a need to express something about the humanity that was gathered together, is gathered together. And we don't know often what happens to these people. So I made 300 clay heads. You can see I'm into multiples too, and then cast them with paper. And that is those two, which are, might say, memorials to the immigration travesty. So Tina, thank you for taking me around and everybody else around. If anybody wants to, if you want to go back to pieces or want me to talk about something more, I'm happy to do that. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to say that hopefully I can answer?
Well, the one question I had for the feathers and flutter, were those monotypes in those large pieces?
Yes, I have a pile of 3 monotypes. I've been a printmaker for a long time. the successful ones, the ones that are needs work, and that's the tallest one, the highest one with most in it, and then the ones that are really not going to become anything, basically headed for some other destination, shall I say, like the circular file. But these are monotypes that I like, but not well enough to hang them as individual pieces. So I started cutting them out. That's particularly, you can see on the Flutter and Fly one, the kinds of pieces that they came out of. But I was actually quite thrilled to see how they belong together. And the art just keeps teaching me a lot of lessons. You think things don't belong together, and they get together and they say a lot more than you thought ever could have been possible. So I'm definitely led by the materials, by the art, and thankfully with this pandemic that has enabled me to develop that more and rely on it more. It's also, the pandemic has taught me to not be afraid of letting a piece go where it will go. It's more process oriented. I don't need to tell you that there are pieces that are not here that didn't make the cut. And so sometimes the process is beautiful, and sometimes it turns out really not to be show worthy, shall I say. But that's just part of the process. And I just feel like I'm very fortunate to have had teachers that have helped me rely on that kind of conversation with the materials and letting go and letting these individual pieces become. So did that answer your question? I can't even remember what it was.
Yes, it was a monotype, but thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, right.
That's okay. It's a beautiful collection.
Thank you.
So
and
now
thank you all for being here. I just, I'll see some of you in the breakout rooms, and we can talk about these in detail if you wish.
Yes, definitely. So now we're in Kitty Caparella's gallery. Kitty? Oh, you're, yeah, you want to unmute.
Okay, here I am.
Yep.
Well, my current outlook is looking for abstractions or making abstractions of things that I see or start. This was, and the other thing that I do is I take a camera and I go to some place and I just look for abstract images. And sometimes I don't find them, but I find something within the image that I make larger, and then I change it. So some of these, this one is totally, it's called Horizons of My Mind. And I just started with the colors, and I happen to like dark grays, and then of course to brighten it up, it's the reds, and there's about 3-4 reds and a yellow in this one. What I do is take abstract images that I see in various places. The last exhibit was at a barn, and I found several different pieces that would just, you wouldn't see them in artwork or what have you. This one was somehow in a yard that I saw that this is very much like what I saw, but it looks like a globe, and it looks like, a green globe that we are, fighting for right now. And initially I was thinking the Green New Deal on it, but changed the title.
So Kitty, you're working with encaustic, right?
Right, it's encaustic paint. And I was a printmaker, and you could probably tell by some of these images that that's what I started as, in part because I was in the newspaper business as a reporter, and I loved the smell of ink and paper. And so that's how I started and graduated from PAFA as a printmaker. And then I took this course in encaustic painting, and initially was just doing encaustic, and then discovered encaustic oil paint, which gives you a thicker kind of substance, and brighter, and it had some weight to it. So I've stuck with doing small images because a lot of times just for financial reasons, because the cost of encaustics is, for a 3-inch by 5-inch thing, 2-inch, 3-inch by 4 inches, it's like $200 to $300.
Is
And
that
so,
a stick?
yeah, that's the kind you melt. So that's how I got started. And then I said, well, how about small pieces? Because people who would buy things basically have big pieces, and then they need little small pieces elsewhere. So this, you might want to guess where this would have come from. And it looks like a totally abstract kind of thing, but this was actually in a barn, and the light was coming through slats. These figures here, it's just, I fall in love with the shadows, and with kind of unusual images, etc., and then work with them. These are, you might want to, I'll deal with that in my room, etc. These this is called it really comes out as blue, and it's very green, actually. These blue lines are green. This is finding, I forget what I called it, damn it. Oh, well. But I turn whatever I find in colors that I like, and manipulate the image to make it be my image, especially with this one. This one started, it's similar to one that you're going to see next, but this one completely was changed. And then I focused on the greens and blues and grays. I love the steel gray that you see in a lot of my work. And I kept thinking, this is it's sort of like a party music kind of a image. And so I just kind of, I like the materials that I work with, and then I work on this image. Now this one, I'll tell you what this was. You would never, ever, ever guess. Okay. When I had a residency at the Art Barn, which is in South, sort of central Pennsylvania, there was a gas tank that was sort of hadn't been used in 100 years, and the paint was coming off. And I had done a drawing of a drawing of this painting, and this is a much softer, changed image of it and much larger, because the initial painting was about 4 inches by 3 inches or 2 inches. So I really fell in love with this. So you're going to see like different kinds of styles, but I'm reacting to whatever the image is and then what to make of it. This is a steel gray and King's blue, and it reminded me of the forms that we see that come from ancient times that are found on islands or what have you. So that, yeah, yes, okay. And this one is actually related to that blue-green one before, and let's see. The more I painted it, the more it became a living organism. And, you know, you won't find it in anything, but it's so organic that, you know, it just spoke to me. And some of it is vertical, some of it is just weird.
Okay, you're responding to things that you see in nature, right?
Well, it's nature, but it's also in other places. I may find something and then interpret it in nature. For example, this is, well, you're not going to believe well, I'll tell you. I went to a car junkyard and found all kinds of abstract images. And this was one of them that I saw, that I took and changed the colors. This one, the red one right next to it, is a similar one that I found on a dying truck, you know, and then, you know, I manipulated it as well. But the right-hand one was, you know, I saw it as a part of a deep sea kind of a thing where you would find living kind of organisms that were brightly colored, like offshore, and, you know, in a blue water. But, you know, it is what it is. You can see whatever you want to see in it. But, you know, so let's see. But it looks like I don't have a style, but I'm reacting to the image itself, that I'm looking to explore, and I'm doing it with color and with drawing and with whatever. So these look like, this one reminds me of a piano, and but it wasn't. It was rusty old things I found at in a junkyard, I think it was, that I just thought that, well, they were so beautiful that if I just kind of limited the colors, you know, that it would pop. And that's what I think happened. And this is similar in that was another place that I, you know, had seen this kind of image in a sort of a, I just saw the image. I liked the image. I liked the curve. I liked the, and I then changed all the colors to make it mine. So I don't know. I'm not very, whatever.
No, it's very interesting, Kitty, and it's beautiful work. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm not very good at.
It's interesting that you hang out in junkyards a lot.
Well, it's junkyards, and it's also also just places that has unusual shapes.
Yeah, well, colors and textures and
Well, I change the colors, so, you know, I mean, if I like the color, I might keep it, but then I'll make it with some other kinds of colors. So I'm interested in color, shape, and
form.
abstractions and forms. Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, now we're moving to Jeanne O'Shell's gallery. Jeanne?
Hi. Hi, everyone. I just want to say real quickly, thank you, Mike and Tina, for having me. I'm actually really happy that these two pieces are outside because they're probably my favorites. This one painting on the right, well, I'll talk about this painting. Yeah. So one painting on the right, I was really thinking about a particular painting. I was thinking about Picasso's Woman in the Mirror. And it's kind of funny. I think I've seen all these, I went to PAF, I graduated in 2014, and I've looked at all these different painters, and I really gravitate to these paintings that I grew up with that were in my parents' house. And this was a print, Picasso's Woman in the Mirror, was a print at my parents', and I remember my dad was always telling me, one of them is you and one of them is my sister, and he would never tell me which was which. And so that's kind of what my work is about. That's what I'm really focusing on, is women's identity, not only in relationship to how they see themselves, but their relationship with other women. And I had Tina, she was kind of asking me how the fiber art connects. And I think that's part of it, is this idea of women's identity and women's work. But they kind of evolved out of these collages I used to make. And I really only made collages out of things that I came into, or that people gave me, or I found. And I just came into a bunch of fiber in this loom one day. So I started weaving. And the collages were kind of my way. I wasn't really sold. All my paintings in this show are done in oil, and I wasn't really sold on oil painting at first. That wasn't really my thing. There's this beautiful quote by Frank Stella, and he says, I tried to keep the paint as good as it was in the can. And I think that was my frustration, was I could not keep it as good as it was in the can. I was always kind of mixing up my colors in a way that I didn't really intend to. So if I had like these pieces of things that I really enjoyed, if I put them together, I could kind of keep them that way. So these paintings, they're very new and different from my other paintings. They're pretty on the raunchy side of things. And it's because kind of these other dolls are basically based on Barbie dolls and dolls that I grew up with. I've kind of fallen down this rabbit hole of like fine art doll makers. And they really kind of go crazy with the proportions and the anatomy and everything. And it's kind of been like a fun way for me to experiment with looking at the figure. And that's kind of why I started painting these dolls, is because, you know, I went to the academy and I came home and I didn't have access to the figure anymore. And it feels kind of silly right now. But at the time I was like, oh, I have all these Barbie dolls. I'll just paint Barbie dolls. And that's pretty close to painting the figure. But pretty quickly I found I wasn't so fascinated with the similarities of the figure to the dolls. I was getting more fascinated with these differences between the two. And I think especially there's a lot of interesting history behind Barbie. It's kind of like this strange figure that it's almost genderless, but not quite. It's not too suggestive, but it's something a child could identify as a woman. So these ones are ones that I actually started painting these like probably about 6 years ago, and I never finished them. And I think COVID, the whole COVID situation kind of brought me back to them, because I think COVID, being in this lockdown situation, I was kind of like in a similar mental state when I started them. Like I was in this place, like I felt kind of like, you know, a little hopeless and helpless, and I wasn't really in a good spot. And I think kind of working on these again, I was kind of like grew as an artist. I started adding these flowers to them. I think about symbolism a lot when I'm working. Like this particular flower is Jacob's ladder. So I think there's probably a lot of Christians. I grew up Catholic. There's probably a lot of Christian imagery in these paintings. I wouldn't say I'm a good Christian anymore, but it's still in me. It's still there. And I think about sisters a lot. I think about, you know, this one's I think is called Rapunzel Sisters. And I really think about, you know, how women support each other, but maybe sometimes not so much. Maybe there's a competitiveness between them that's sometimes healthy, sometimes it's not. And I really liked, I like this kind of, I really get into the doll's hair with some of these. I don't know why. There's just like this interesting play of light on their hair. It's kind of funny. So I have these two paintings of a toy that was called Sky Dancers, and they were actually recalled because you put them in like this little mechanism that would launch them and they would spin around and fly in the air. And I think they recalled them because it started blinding children. And they were really pretty and interesting. But I think they're kind of like a collector's item now. I should have probably kept them in better shape. As for, I'm kind of getting into this with painting. So actually this one was painted on an MDF board. I do painting with a twist on the weekend, and they were getting rid of these like little cutout shapes. So I just took one and made this painting on there. So if you see these in person, like we were saying, it's nothing beats seeing the paintings in person. I really am starting to really get into, I sand a lot. I sand my painting, I scrape, and I'm really building up. I have this really kind of peculiar technique I've been working on where I let my paint dry and I scrape it off the palette and I mix it with wet paint to kind of create this strange buildup. And at first it was just a way to kind of, you know, I guess create a visual difference in the painting. Like I was just trying to create variety in the textures, but definitely in that one particular one, the smaller one that's on the cutout, I'm almost starting to make a sculpture out of it. Like there's a particular, like some of the lilies in there, the lily buds, they're really kind of starting to come out of the painting. And if I had to kind of predict where I'm gonna go next, it would be that I might start making dolls or integrating the fiber art with some of my paintings. I've always had, probably for the past couple of years, I've had people telling me I should probably start making my own dolls. And I think that's where I'd like to go. I definitely do a lot of investigating of other people, what they do, doll makers. There's these two great doll makers. I would suggest their name is the Popovi sisters. They're Russian and they make these really cool lanky dolls and they've got kind of these pouty faces. They're pretty interesting. Yeah, I like, so these are Lily of the Valley. So I call this one Tummy Ache, I think. And these are Lily of the Valley. I think about lilies a lot because that's the flower of Joan of Arc. And that's my namesake. And I don't know, for some reason, I feel like it's really helpful to me to be, you know, I'm always trying to think about other artists. I'm always trying to think about other people and try to use them as a way to kind of propel myself forward. I think a lot of times I can feel really stuck when I'm painting and making art. So I'm just kind of like trying to trick myself into making more work. So these two tapestries, they're actually my last show at Cerulean, I showed only fiber pieces. And these are the largest ones I've made so far. I've been really getting into this pom-pom thing. I think the pom-poms are helpful because weaving is such like, it's such like an up and down, it's kind of like a straight line. It's like naturally, at least that's the way I work. It's so like, it feels like there's a lot of straight lines in weaving. And I think the circles of the pom-poms kind of add something to it. They kind of contrast those lines. And they're very like girly and cute colors and, you know. And this one particular, I think all of these Barbie dolls, I kind of initially lit them with this monster lighting, like it has this light underneath of them. And it kind of shows them in a way, it almost makes them look like scary or haunted or something. And it kind of shows them in a way that you know, is unusual. I'm not really used to it. And I think it kind of, I don't know, it adds something to it. It definitely creates interesting shapes with the shadows and things like that. Yeah, I think that's all I really have to say. I really love showing with Cerulean. I used to live in Chinatown. I live in the suburbs now. So I feel like showing with Cerulean gives me an excuse to come back to Philadelphia every once in a while. So yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks so much, Jean. It's a fantastic show.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the artists. So this is the end of the tour. So now we're going to take a couple minutes to open the breakout rooms. So stand by for that. Thanks again to everyone for coming.